Thanks for that, Jeff, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege for me to be here. I know when Jean-Marc Lancé asked me if I would consider doing this about 6 months ago, I of course said yes. I have a great amount of respect for Major General Lancé. He's one of the better generals in the military, I'm sure, and when Simon took over from him, it just carried forward. My respect for the leaders of this CADTC organization is significant. This is a forum that always tackles salient issues and brings together a diverse group of experts, and so to think about difficult and complex issues, so I'm pleased on behalf of CANSOFCOM that we can contribute to that this morning. Cette année n'est pas différente. La performance humaine est un sujet qui me tient à cœur et qui est crucial pour mon commandement aux forces spéciales. J'ai hâte de vous expliquer pourquoi il en est ainsi et je suis impressionné par le travail effectué par mes équipes en vue d'améliorer notre compréhension et notre mise en pratique de la performance humaine. Before we get into it, let me just give you a quick overview of my remarks today. I'm going to start by explaining why CANSOF treats human performance, or HP, and resiliency as a priority. In short, it's because we have to secure our competitive advantage, and our competitive advantage that we're always trying to push forward derives from our people. Next, I'll explain the CANSOF HP philosophy, and just to preview that, we believe that taking a broad and holistic approach, and one that is woven into the very culture and fabric of our organization, is essential. And finally, I'll outline CANSOF's practical approach to HP, and I'll give you a couple of examples of how CANSOF's innovative and comprehensive initiatives we think are working. So the why. At its core, HP for CANSOF is about the need for an optimized professional force to achieve operational excellence. This is summarized by the first of the 5 soft truths that emanate from Tampa, which is humans are more important than hardware. For SOF and our focus on the deployment of small teams, our competitive advantage, as I mentioned, derives from our people. Optimized human performance at the individual level is also directly linked to our operational culture, which is characterized by an output-oriented culture, a results-driven ethos, and a relentless pursuit of excellence in everything that our members do. Operational tempo is a critical factor driving our focus on HP. CANSOF units operate at the edge of capacity. I often say to my subordinate commanders that our machine in CANSOF is too fast-moving and too nimble for me to positively control it, and so I give context, they do a lot of the control, and it's power to the edge, something I talked about yesterday at Armed Forces Council with the CDS and the service commanders. Our force structure to generation ratio is less than 1-to-1, force generation to force employment right now. And so that gives you a sense of our op-tempo. We anticipate that there will be a generally sustained demand for soft effects moving forward, which is why we have to grow somewhat to accrue a little bit of capacity to help offset that 1-to-1 ratio. The nature and tempo of our missions, high readiness posture, and our training imposes a cost on CANSOF personnel. Our experts tell us that the delta between force capacity of CANSOF and the expectations exerted upon it creates a human risk space, and that has the potential to impact CANSOF's functional capacity and performance. So that is why CANSOF seeks a deliberately improved understanding and advancement of the human performance agenda. This is a risk space that we must mitigate. So this is about maintaining our operational effectiveness now and about sustaining and enhancing it moving forward in an increasingly complex future operating environment. And especially given the small numbers of SOF operators and the investments required to build them, we take this seriously because we have a view of the 20 to 30-year operator, despite a consistently high readiness, high op-tempo context. And so trying to build that 20 to 30-year operator demands that we look at the marginal issues that we can bring to bear. Ultimately, it all comes down to the operating environment and SOF's specific role and competitive advantage within that. So let me just spend a couple seconds to dive deeper into it. The assessment of the global security context outlined in Canada's recent defense policy confirms what defense and security experts and practitioners already appreciate. The character of conflict and warfare is changing, marked primarily by new magnitudes of the concepts of unpredictability, acceleration, and threat multiplication. I just got back from Iraq a couple of days ago visiting my task force, and we see in Daesh a very adaptive enemy, an enemy that is taking commercial off-the-shelf technologies and employing them very readily against us. U.S. Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley recently shared his views of what this new normal will mean concretely for operations. Of particular interest to me was his vision of future conditions. Recent operational models in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and I would add maybe Eastern Europe now, have resulted in a generation of military personnel who are used to operating from fixed sites with a wide variety of available comforts. You know, really good DFACs, some familiar chain restaurants in certain cases, coffee shops. Contrast this with what we know is happening, including the rapid evolution of and easier access to technology and weapons that are more lethal, more precise, and exponentially increase the information availability to our enemies. And in the future, stationary forces will therefore be dead forces, vulnerable to adversaries with real-time access to targeting information at an individual level, and effects delivered in some cases through their handheld devices and small drones. To counter this, General Milley notes that our forces must untether themselves from the umbilical cord of logistics and supply. Increasingly, our fighting forces must prepare for and be able to succeed and thrive in more progressively austere environments characterized by greater self-reliance. Now, the second point I would make is the issue of mission command. Mission command is something that I think will grow more and more important, and the point I made to Armed Forces Council yesterday in terms of the distributed nature of CANSOF's deployments was this power to the edge concept. This idea that mission command is fundamentally centered on the notion of trust, and that we have to do a better job of talking to our people about what mission command actually means, and making sure that our culture is adapted to the execution in a mission command context. I often speak of the compression of the operational level of warfare that we are experiencing in the execution phase. And as the general officer in Canada who's responsible for the operational level of our contribution in Iraq, what we see is a much more rapid, near-instant feedback loop between the strategic and indeed the political levels and actions taken at the tactical level, making it more difficult in some cases to execute on a mission command basis because of the compression of the operational level and the speed with which information flows between the tactical and the strategic. The paradox is that for the types of missions and threats that we face, the ability to adapt in theater is more critical than ever. Thus, we also need to be doing more to reinforce mission command and all that enables this at the individual level. So when I talk about human performance, I'm not just talking about the psychological and such. I'm talking about leadership, not just training our people how to fight, but training them how to think about how to fight. Professional military education, overall culture and training, to name just a few of the regimes. All of these things required to build the judgment necessary to take calculated risks and advance the mission at a local level. Of course, this will require operational commanders and general officers to adapt as well, and will require a great deal of trust and communication at the strategic level. But in parallel, we must start strengthening these capacities in our people so they are ready and deserving of the trust that we have to place in them if we want to have mission success. A third important point is the need to break down our bubbles or echo chambers. This includes guarding against military and civilian disconnect, and that's something that our CDS works hard at every day to ensure that our military is very connected to the political level. We don't have to look very far for evidence that it is more important than ever to avoid groupthink in our own individual organizations, and I think that's especially true for special forces. We can often be limited by our own pre-existing biases and beliefs. I make it a point to remind myself and my leadership team of the maxim: we find comfort in those who agree with us, but we find growth in those who don't. We need to seek and create opportunities to listen to those who make us uncomfortable and encourage the same in our subordinates. We must sponsor an atmosphere of cognitive conflict if we are truly to progress. This is important because our ability to accurately understand and be effective in the FOE will depend increasingly on sophisticated analytical skills, flexible perspectives, and familiarity with other worldviews. Du point de vue de la performance humaine, cela met en lumière, quant à moi, l'importance d'une formation militaire professionnelle solide et continue, et pour plus d'occasions créatives de perfectionnement professionnel. Cela renforce aussi la question de la diversité de nos propres membres, mais aussi des expériences et des perspectives auxquelles ces personnes sont exposées. Par conséquent, le discours du général Milley favorise la prise d'une approche plus vaste sur la performance humaine. Nous devons tenir compte de tous les facteurs requis pour préparer nos militaires à survivre et à réussir dans un contexte opérationnel changeant, complexe et imprévisible. Optimiser la performance humaine dans ce contexte est une entreprise complexe en soi. Cela m'a particulièrement marqué, en grande partie car ça reflète déjà bien la réalité à laquelle font face les forces d'opération spéciales dans la mise en œuvre de leur rôle et de leur mission, en particulier en Irak. Special Operations Forces, by the nature of their missions and tasks, operate right at the very line that marks the transition between what is the current operating environment and the future operating environment. In many ways, SOF exists in the FOE. And at a minimum, we must be prepared to be the first to experience new ways and means employed by our adversaries. SOF will often act as a lead turn in certain areas for the rest of the armed forces and other security partners. A key dilemma, though, is that SOF must remain recognizable to and interoperable with the Canadian Armed Forces and the national security and defense enterprise. And so there's an inherent tension between us trying to be as adapted to the future as possible, but not being so far out there that we become illegitimate or unrecognizable to the defense and security ecosystem. We still need to work together, and the effectiveness of SOF remains dependent on an effective CAF. While our size, a small size and flatness allows CANSOF to change and adapt quickly, there are limits to how much changing and adapting we should do and how fast we should do it. Nevertheless, CANSOF today is experiencing that future context and must behave in a way that is similar to what General Milley himself outlined. Be on the move, be agile, build capacities that focus on understanding, illuminating, and on the cognitive aspects, and operate, of course, through a mission command culture. And my task forces and small teams must do so in a situation of increasingly less clarity and higher and different kinds of risks than ever before. We are demanding more at lower levels than we have ever before. War has changed since I put on the uniform. The Cold War in the 1980s could be characterized as generals' wars, where force posture was the fight. The Balkans in the 1990s, over the 3 tours I served there, changed the emphasis to that of the battle group commander, lieutenant colonels who wrestled with complex problem sets, largely contained to specific geographical regions using the Cold War set of tools. Iraq and Afghanistan in the aughts further changed the game, largely becoming captains and majors wars, where the ground force commander owned the problem space. Today, this trend continues, resulting from the compression I referred to earlier. Iraq today is largely a sergeant's war for my force, with small detachments interspersed across a wide battle space. For a CANSOF detachment commander, if they deploy outside a Special Operations Task Force context, being in those sergeant's wars means that there's a very, very short line between that sergeant and Parliament. We derive our authorities from Parliament, and my accountabilities as a level 1 commander go back to Parliament. If I deploy a sergeant unilaterally, he falls right behind me in the order of march. The risks are high, the judgment required elevated, yet our members are achieving important effects for the Government of Canada and our allies around the world. For example, CANSOF's contribution to Iraq's detachment commanders advising and assisting in now Iraqi security force elements at the battalion and brigade commander levels daily in their fight against Daesh. On operations in the Western Hemisphere, DET commanders lead build partner capacity missions with other SOF nations and share with them lessons learned on the fly, building greater interoperability between Canada and partner nations. During a recent operation in Africa, one of my DET commanders was responsible to see to the element that we deployed into a country. He had to land, regroup with other SF nations that were bolting onto us, take his partner force on a 1,200-kilometer road move to a specific area, in areas that were molested by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Boko Haram, and in some cases Daesh, perform activities at that extended line of communication area, and then road move back after a month and a half, the 1,200 kilometers, to retrograde back to Canada. A sergeant did that. I mean, that is a pretty significant undertaking for a senior enlisted leader who is in his first opportunity to command. I'm glad to see the computers operating here just like it does back at my office. These detachment commanders' wars are a signature of how CANSOF operates, and they starkly demonstrate the level of human performance we demand and require. Maintenant que j'ai illustré le pourquoi et le besoin de donner à la question de la performance humaine la même priorité que mon commandement lui donne, laissez-moi vous expliquer notre philosophie de la performance humaine, c'est-à-dire la façon dont nous y pensons, du point de vue qui oriente notre approche et nos activités. So as I mentioned earlier, first for me it's all about culture. No force can be successful in the distributed regime if its cultural orientations to things like risk, trust, and even process are not well adapted. Second, resiliency is a thread that runs through CANSOF's approach to HP. Resiliency is important with respect to our people, from their recruitment, development, sustainment to their retention, as well as enhancing the potential for that 20 to 30-year operator. But we also consider the concepts of resiliency and human performance as overall goals for the CANSOF organization itself and for our culture itself, not just our individual people. And this underpins all of our work. Next, the physical and psychological aspects of human performance are of course critical. But if you assume that these are the primary or exclusive priorities that we have, you would be wrong. CANSOF believes it is essential to take a broad and holistic approach to HP and resiliency. I will shortly outline some examples of our effective and even innovative approaches to protect and enhance physical, psychological, and mental resiliency. My team, they're at the back table there, led by Sue Janin, who I've worked with since I came back into the military in JTF2 in 2002. Phenomenal team. And as you'll see in my comments, one of the reasons why I think what we do works is because I trust Sue. And she trusts me and we know each other. Physical and mental strength are not sufficient for what we need to do. I want to underline that we treat as equally important what some might think of the softer aspects of human performance, things in the spiritual domain, things that relate to the family. CANSOF's unique employment environment, ethos, tempo, pursuit of excellence, sustained periods of readiness, high expectations, etc., place demands not only on our people, the inordinate stress that comes just with being at CANSOF, but puts stress on their families by extension. We therefore feel we have an obligation to provide the best programs and care not only for our members, but their families, so that they as a unit are equipped to thrive within the SOF environment. Studies confirm that those with higher quality social networks are more adaptive, able to cope, and in better physical health. Similarly, spiritual resilience encompasses a spectrum that speaks to strengthening the individual and team's ethical and moral compass, as well as promoting a value system, and leads to a strong sense of self, team cohesion, and trust. And this is a key point that I talk about every time I go into Iraq. We must fight right. We must keep our honor clean. It is easy for young troopers' frames of reference to get skewed in the face of an enemy like Daesh. And our job as leaders and the organizational constructs that we put into place must reinforce maintaining a pure frame of reference in the fight in the future. I also strongly believe that leadership competencies in professional military education and professional development need to be understood as integral to optimizing SOF human performance. The cognitive is distinct from the psychological, but also essential to enhancing human performance and needs its own deliberate approach. And all of this needs to be conceptualized and operationalized as an interdependent ecosystem, i.e. the approach that is both broad and holistic, and with a focus on sustaining the long-term operator. Essentially, we conceive HP as an interconnected, mutually reinforcing system of domains along these lines. Oh, there we go. This is important to emphasize, as I think there can be a tendency to focus on the mental and physical enhancements without fully considering everything that enables, or in some cases impedes, individuals. So how does CANSOF put this into action? This is not intended to be a prescription or a panacea for everyone. These are examples of what work for us in CANSOF. I think the issue is, as you consider what I'm presenting here, what works beyond CANSOF potentially into other organizations, and how could we scale that up if indeed you think it's of interest. To begin, I want to highlight the fundamental value of having an embedded organic HP research and development team like I talked about earlier. They know us, my troops know them, they understand the organization, and so we can get right to the heart of the matter, which is adding substantive value to the program. The results are compelling, and CANSOF is gaining a reputation, I think, with SOF allies as an innovation leader in this area. I firmly believe that this success is inextricably linked to the fully integrated and mobile model that we have with our HP research team. Two examples of highly successful initiatives developed by the HP team are the Special Operations Mental Agility Program, which I'll talk about here, and the vignette on the Special Operations Insertion Extraction course that we do. Our Special Operations Mental Agility training is a customized resilience and mental skills training, grounded in the latest research in the areas of performance enhancement, sports psychology, and neuroscience. The goal is to equip CANSOF members with a cognitive and behavioral skill set that enables them to effectively manage and perform within the unique demands we place on them. It is an example of how the command is able to rapidly conceive, test, or pilot, and then implement and scale ideas. This all happened within the space of about 10 months. From problem definition, me at the head of the table saying, I'm concerned about some of the emphasis we're placing on, mental well-being of our troops, to an output like SOMA. This unique course has drawn considerable interest from our SOF partner nations, as we recently ran an international SOMA serial, and in fact the CEO of my school just asked me this morning if we can service a request from another ally to go and run a course in their nation, which we'll do. CANSOF's Insert Extract course, this is interesting. We run Insert Extract courses for people to fast rope and rappel out of helicopters, whatever. And in my first year or so in command, every course we'd run, we would tend to have injuries. People would break femurs or crack a pelvis, and it was something that was of concern to me. And so I asked the team to look into it, and with the assistance of our human performance team, they identified the issues, came up with a pre-test, so we screened the people we were going to put on SOIE. And since the implementation of that pre-test, 0% injury rate. And so there is, that is significant. If you follow the evidence, we just got really lucky in the last couple of serials, or we've actually done something that makes a difference. And I would argue it's the latter. Our human performance team is currently focusing on future formal programs for physical and cognitive enhancement, sleep maintenance, and operational nutrition. I've been at JTF2 since 1994. I think they're wasting their time on nutrition. It's really all about chewing tobacco and coffee. I think as long as we have those two things, we'll be fine. So there are some examples, those are some examples of the approach to HP in the psychological, cognitive, and physical domains. I'd like to give you now a quick example of how we're implementing a broader interconnected approach. In particular, this is so important to us that we've developed something called Optimizing the Performance of the Force and Families strategy, or OPF2. The vision for this strategy is to achieve a well-balanced force of physically, psychologically, spiritually, and socially robust members and their families, whose resilience and total fitness in all the domains enables them to thrive in the SOF environment and to meet a wide range of demands. Just to underscore, this is a holistic strategy that aims to alleviate the pressure on individual members and their families. The strategy is structured to identify gaps and develop programs to enhance psychological, or the mind, physical, or the body, spiritual and social health. Permettez-moi de prendre quelques minutes pour parler des aspects familiaux et spirituels que l'on ne tient pas suffisamment en considération ou que nous ignorons quelquefois lors de nos discussions sur la performance humaine. Les objectifs du OPF2 famille comprennent à veiller à ce que les familles aient accès aux programmes qui ont répondu à leurs besoins, qui ont optimisé leur résilience. Nous prenons aussi une approche plus délibérée pour ce qui est de préparer nos membres aux réalités du style de vie des forces d'opération spéciales et pour veiller à ce qu'ils aient de bonnes communications et interactions avec le commandement. Au cours de la phase d'évaluation de la stratégie, les familles ont été comprises dans les consultations que nous avons faites. Pour ce qui est de l'aspect spirituel, nous veillons à ce que les militaires et leurs familles aient accès aux programmes religieux et spirituels avant, pendant et après les opérations. Nous travaillons aussi dans le but de renforcer la résilience spirituelle et de favoriser une culture axée sur les valeurs. In both of those domains, we believe the benefits will contribute significantly to our mission readiness. Ultimately, the OPF2 strategy is an integral part of our approach to the human performance agenda, which seeks to prepare, maintain, and reconstitute the readiness of our force. The OPF2 team of experts is focused on this strategy. It is not a secondary task. It will focus on tailored approaches across all the different categories of the demographics of CANSOF members, whether they're operators, operational supporters, civilian defense team members, and that across the 5 very differentiated units that comprise my force. Finally, I'd like to just touch quickly on this theme of a broad conception of the human performance agenda and just touch briefly on PME and even lessons learned. The value proposition of a SOF member operating at the edge in the FOE lies in their agility. And this turns on the agility of the organization itself. Something we always talk about in CANSOFCOM. Staying lean, staying flat, distributing power to the edge. When taking into account the development of our personnel, the structure of our lessons learned process, and CANSOF's ability to quickly adapt, our PME allows us additional avenues to enhance the effectiveness of our people. Due to our small size and flatness, we are able to rapidly transmit lessons learned on operations or training through the after-action review process that we have to analyze and validate the need for change and implement this change in the near term. We recently did this, and so we've done a lot of casualty collection operations with our medical people in Iraq at the casualty collection points. Our course was designed to have about 10 to 20 in a mass CAS event. In some cases, in 20 hours, we were seeing over 100 trauma patients right from the battlefield. What we did is we took that experience from one rotation, fed it into our process, resulted in a change to the Special Operations Medical Technician course, and we deployed those new skill sets in the next rotation to Iraq. So you're talking 3, 4, 5 months later. Our feedback loop between force development, force generation, force employment, and how we spin that is exceptionally tight. And it's one of the things I think that makes us constantly able to sort of, it's like adaptation overmatch, if you will, to an ever-changing enemy. We take a similar approach to our professional military education and the development of leadership competencies. As such, we have shaped our individual training and education development system in CANSOF into a process that allows us to, as I mentioned earlier, not just train people how to fight, but train them how to think about how to fight. We emphasize this at a very low level, DP2. Within our junior leaders qualification, we talk to them about things like mission command, strategic objectives, and includes emphasis on things like cultural awareness and gender-based analysis plus. Child soldiers. We are talking to our corporals and master corporals about issues at that level. All of our courseware is delivered within a hyper-realistic training environment meant to mimic the current operating environment. So these decisions align with our culture and they're critical to our ability, we think, to effectively design, deliver, and adapt a system of professional military education that is directly linked to enhancing our members' human performance in a very evolving sort of climate. To sum up, then, let me just reiterate a couple key points. First, our operating environment missions, value proposition requires that we stay at the outer edges of enhanced human performance. And we have a lot to work with. I mean, we have the luxury of being able to select a lot of the people that come to work for us, and so we start with a great product. By and large, a product in the operator space that comes from the Canadian Army to the tune of about 90–92%, combat arms. And so we take that product and then with our HP agenda, we think refine it and enculturate it to what we're expecting. CANSOF must and will continue to pursue excellence and innovation in this capability area. Next, contrary to assumptions some make, CANSOF does not focus exclusively on the physical aspects of human performance, this mythology that lives on from the 90s that my guys all have 18-inch necks, giant guns, and just want to get after physical things. Nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, they're fit, but the average age of the assaulter in JTF2 would shock some people. It's over 38 years old. That's the average age. It is a old man's game mentally with a younger man's game physically. Lastly, human performance and resilience must become woven into the fabric of any organization, we would argue. It must become part of the culture. It is not a set of programs. It is a way of life. And it means that there is no end state, no full operational capability. This, like most things in CANSOF, will be evergreen. We are comfortable in a change environment because change is the constant for us. There are still, of course, areas where CANSOF and the broader CAF need to strengthen our knowledge and approaches. And while I argued today for a broad conceptualization of HP, I sometimes wonder if it's even broad enough, if we are missing other critical factors. I think here of modernized talent management or a nuanced career management. And I think that's an area that we're going to need to explore with some urgency moving forward. I hope you'll have some time in the remaining segments of this conference to discuss some of these questions. I hope that what we've offered you here today is of some use. Could you go to the next slide? I love finishing with this slide because as I tell people, we are in the arena. We make mistakes. We do come up short from time to time. Anybody can sit back and editorialize and criticize the people who are in the arena, but the credit goes to the folks who are giving it a shot and trying to move forward.